In today's market, SUVs and crossovers are possibly becoming more popular than sedans and definitely wagons, unfortunately. And this SQ5 is no exception. In today's video, we're gonna go over our install procedure for our V3 OBD2 gauges on the B9 and B9.5 Q5 models. This is a pretty simple install procedure, but you will need a few tools. One, plastic pry tool. We've got a T30 Torx. You can have just a screwdriver or a bit like this. You don't actually need to turn anything difficult. It's just a little scrivet, but you will need the bit to gain access to that fitting. And an 8mm socket. You will need a socket, not a wrench. You don't need to have a drill. I've got a drill just because, but you'll need that. Our gauges also consist of three main components. We've got our display with the cable for that. We've got our control box, which is the brains of the unit, and then we have our harness assembly. And so what we want to do before we start this install procedure is go ahead and plug everything in. We want to connect our harness to the control box, our display to the control box, then plug your OBD2 connector into the OBD2 port. There we go. And when you plug that in, you may see dots, you may see some numbers flash on the screen if it's the first time. Go ahead, start your engine. The gauge is designed to turn on and off of the engine. You'll see some dots. They might increase in speed. And then we have data. And so this is going to be RPM. Let me jump back over to RPM. So we can see right here, we've got our RPM responding with throttle input with the RPM. We know we've got good data there. The gauge is working, it paired. We're all good to go. We can continue with the procedure. So go ahead and disconnect that. Set it to the side for now. And then our first step is going to be removing this dash side trim. So we can go ahead and work in there like so. It's got 3 or 4 clips on it. Just kind of keep rolling it out and it will come loose. You can set it aside. Next, we're going to want to get our T30, and this little guy right here is just it's called a scrivet, and it's a rivet and a screw mixed together, and it takes no force at all, but you're just gonna kind of gently turn that, and you want the screw to work out. Now, be mindful, if you're pushing in on this while you're turning, it will just stay in forever. So just gently turn and let it work itself out. Like that, and then you can pull it out. And it's gonna be 2 pieces. And this is called a scrivet. So there's the screw part, and here's the rivet part. And as this screw threads in, it spreads the top, and then it cannot pull back out of the hole it's in. So to install it and remove it, you gotta have the screw, do this here, pulled back out, or even all the way out is fine. But if you have it about like that, that's how you'll want to reinstall it. So we'll set that aside. Now we've got our 2 8mm bolts we want to take out real quick. Set those aside. Now we're going to pull this little trim piece off. This is kind of awkward because they have a weird locking mechanism. I'll show you in a second, but we want to pull out, slide it over to the side, and then it comes out. So you'll see that here. There's the first clip, but it won't come off, and that's because we have to move it outward, and now it will come out. And the reason why, if you come in here, we've got this T-shaped bar that goes into this large slot vertically, but when it slides over, it's locked behind and can't come out. So I'm not sure why that's there like that, but it is. So be mindful of that. Next, we're going to pull out on this kind of knee trim here. And before we do that, there's a locking tab kind of here. You have to work that part around and then pull it down. And then that just neatly comes unfastened just like that. And we can let that hang. There is a screw at the bottom, but we don't need to take that off. We just need a little room here to get to the bolts. And so there's gonna be 2 more 8mm. Take that one out. And this one out. Okay, and now we probably want to move our column out just a little bit to give ourselves some room, and possibly down as well. One thing you want to be mindful of before you go yanking your vent out is this harness right here. You will need to depress the release tab and pull down, and then disconnect that. Otherwise, it is pretty short. You don't want to rip that. And now we're good to pull out on the bottom of the vent and start kind of wiggling it out. And at this point, we're almost free, but it is connected to this center piece right here. So what you'll have to do is gently pry this out like that. It sounds violent, but it's not. And work this trim off of the vent trim, which is a little bit of a pain. They really don't want that coming loose. And now We can pull the vent out, we're free. And that last clip that was kind of difficult to get out, if you want to kind of get in there, is this little plastic tab where my finger is sticking into this yellow clip, and it's just a really strong metal clip, so you kind of have to overcome that force. So just be gentle with it, pull straight out, and it will come disconnected. We now have our vent completely out, and we can take this over to the workbench to install our display in place of these top 2 slats. All right, we are now at the desk. We've got our display, we've got our vent and trim assembly, and the only tool you should need during this portion is maybe a little tiny screwdriver. Your plastic pry tool from earlier may work as well. I've got this at my desk, so that's what I'm gonna use. We have a bunch of little locking tabs all the way around the vent, holding this vent to the back of the trim. So we're gonna wanna work our way through here and just kinda, I like to put a little pressure, actually it's already starting to come apart there, and then just start releasing your tabs. That way, as each one unclips, you aren't just refastening it as you try to break another one loose. So don't just go pulling this all the way apart, because there is a harness you'll need to free up. And it may take you a minute to get them all disconnected, but just take your time, work through them. There we go. And so now you can see we've got this wiring harness going from the vent to the trim. We'll go ahead and remove that as well. Just pulls out like that, and then we can set our trim aside. Now, our display is going to take just the place of these top 2 slats, so we don't need to remove all of them. And if you, I don't know if you can actually see this on the camera, probably not. But for the top 3 slats, they are tied together with a bar right where my finger's running. And then the bottom 3 slats are tied together with a bar where my finger's running. And that's so they all move in unison up and down together. We don't care to keep the one here because we're getting rid of these 2 vent slats, but we want to make sure all 3 of these stay locked in place. So my advice would be take your thumb and hold the bottom 3 slats in place so you don't accidentally pull them out. And then we're going to free this little bar, which you might not be able to see in the video, but you'll definitely be able to see it on yours. We want to kind of get that broke free from the slats, and then just pry out and it'll pop out like that. So there's one slat, and it pulled the second one with it. And here's where you can see that little bar that holds them all together. We don't need this one, but you do want this one down here. So if you just go pulling on that slat and all 5 come out, you might have this fall off, and it can be just kind of a tedious thing to put back together. So just be mindful of that. Hold the bottom 3 in place while you pull the top 2 out. Now we're ready to run our cable through the vent, and what we want to do with this is make sure this cable stays flat. We do not want it to be completely all twisted up in the knots. It's a pretty strong and durable cable as long as it's kept flat or just pinched like this. But as soon as you start twisting and everything, that's when it can chafe and cut and tear. So we want the pink cable to stay on the bottom, and we're going to run it through the far left side of the vent all the way against the vent housing, and we want it to be up in the top of the vent as well and go over that flap in the back. So we'll feed that through nice and straight, and you will need to help it past that vent slat just a little bit. So we're feeding it through like that, and it's coming out in the top and the back. We'll pull that through, get all our slack run through there. We're just gonna feed this back in. And then these 2 pegs right here on this side of the display will just press into the vent housing, and then the 2 on the right side will do the same on the right. Those kind of click into place. And now we've got our cable running out the back up in the top corner. Go ahead and don't pull it super tight, but just make sure there's not a bunch of excess slack in here. Pinch it around the corner, and then we're gonna close our flap for the back. And you might need to push the cable over to the side to get this to happen the first time. So now we have the vent flap closed in the back, and that's holding our cable in place. And you can now just pinch that cable around the side, and that's going to be good to install in the car just like that. The reason we use this flat cable is because it can be pinched around the corner like that without hurting anything. The foam takes the place up. It'll be great to install like that. If you get your gauge from us pre-installed in the vent, you may see that we ran it underneath the foam and glued it in place just as an added security there, but you don't have to do that. So now we just want to make sure our side to side still works, our up and down still works. Make sure your flap opens and closes freely. And we are good to go. So now we will take this and kind of roll it back into the trim. Make sure all your clips line up. And then you'll also want to make sure that your illumination wire is in that slot, but it'll clip back into place firmly, and then we can put our connector back into place as well, just like so. So now we're fully back together and ready to go back into the car. Here we are back in the car. We are on the home stretch. We've got our vent and display assembly here, ready to go back in the car, and this is basically just gonna be a reversal of all the removal steps with the added step of routing your cables. And we're gonna start with this display cable. It's going to go through this opening to the side of where your vent goes back in. Just pull that slack through as you set the vent into place. We wanna make sure nothing gets bunched up in here, so just go ahead and pull that slack out gently. And then on the inboard side, we wanna make sure this vent gets behind your center trim here for the cluster, because that needs to be on top. You'll kind of feel this kind of snap into place. Give it a little pressure and it'll snap. And now we want to go ahead and get this center trim clipped in. It's really stiff and feels awkward, but it should snap in like that. And now we want to make sure we don't forget the harness for our illuminated vent wheel. That's going to be this little plug here. Very easy to forget. You want the tab, the lock tab, facing the front of the vehicle, and it just inserts right up into the plug. It's a little tough to see, but it is there. And then there she's home like that. Now, before you put this trim up into place, you don't want to forget 18 times like I did previously to put these two 8mm bolts back in. You can get this one in with this trim in place, but you can't get this one in. So we'll go ahead and get that knocked out. Just like that. Now we can go ahead and snap this lower trim into place. We want to make sure we pull this side flange here around this nub because you can see it doesn't want to go. Pull that up, snaps into place. And then we've got our two side 8mm. We can snug those down. Now we can put our little carbon trim, or yours might be a different color. Take a note here, we've got that weird T-lock bar thing. It needs to go in the tall horizontal part, or the tall vertical part here. Insert that first, then you can slide it over, and now it will snap into place. And now that that's back in, we can put our weird little scrivet guy back in. You may need to work this in at an angle, because a lot of times these are too wide to just press in straight. So kind of feel it out and push. You don't want to push on the center part, you want to push on the edge, or else it won't go in. And now we can lock it into place. Like so. Now we just want to run our control box and OBD2 harness. So go ahead and plug your OBD2 harness into the OBD2 port. And then you can easily tuck this above the trim underneath and route it right through here. This harness is nice and thin. We'll go ahead and plug our display cable in. And then for the sake of keeping this video short, I'm not going to spend the time to wrap this up in foam or anything. We're always packing these wires into our own cars for development stuff, pulling them right back out, and we haven't had any problems with rattles. But if you want, you can wrap this in foam and tape or just neatly zip tie it, however you want to do it. And then the last step is going to be to reinstall this side trim panel. Then we'll just want to go ahead and start the engine to turn the gauge on. It may take a second for it to pair. You might see some dots, and then it should come up with information. That's going to be our RPM. And that's it. We are good to go. We now can do the just ever so satisfying, or not satisfying, depending on if you like to pull these off or not. There she is, brother. And that's it for this one. If you have any questions on this install or other installs that we do, or this product, let us know in the comments below. Tell some friends about P3. We're a small company of 4 guys. Word of mouth is huge for us. We really appreciate your help, and we'll see you in the next one. Route our harness.